Entry hazards have always been impactful, but they ascend to among the most controversial aspects of the game with Generation 4's introduction of Stealth Rock, so powerful as to mandate usage on every team and single-handedly render a significant majority of Pokemon unviable or close to it. Hazards dominated the game like little else. Then in Generation 8, the introduction of heavy-duty boots completely turned this dynamic on its head, providing any boots-equipped Pokemon with an immunity to all hazards. The advantage this provided Pokemon famously weak to hazards like Volcarona and Weavile was obvious and immediate in how it affected the game, but it wasn't too long before players realized how good boots were on pretty much every type of Pokemon. As such, boot spam took over the metagame, with many successful teams absolutely loaded with boots users. Boots were so common, Stealth Rock, while still amazing, ceased to be the truly mandatory move it had been before. Many players, while not necessarily fans of the arguably overpowering effect of hazards, found the extent of the proliferation of boots to be overbearing, and ideas of banning boots or even limiting them per some sort of boots clause were thrown around at various points over the years. With the idea being tried seriously in a bootsless tournament, we decided the time was ripe to examine the effects of this item. Then we can come to a conclusion on whether this highly impactful, controversial item is actually busted. And speaking of quality clothing, here's some high quality undies thanks to this video sponsor, MeUndies. Alright, look, for the men in the room, so most of you according to my analytics, we deserve to be comfortable too, right guys? Well, look no further, MeUndies has got you covered. Seriously, this is like the softest underwear I've ever worn. It feels just like a warm hug or a blanket. It's even got a contoured pouch to make your package look bigger if you catch my drift, as well as a ball caddy that separates the parts of your nether region for maximum comfort. Not only that, MeUndies has style for everyone. They come in a variety of prints to choose from. You could order classic black if you're just all about business, or you can order the more expressive prints. And they come in sizes ranging from extra small to quadruple extra large. And MeUndies isn't just about underwear. They got a whole lounge collection of joggers, hoodies, onesies, and more. And don't worry, the materials that go into MeUndies products are responsibly sourced, and they only work with companies who care about their workers, bringing you that quality comfort. In fact, MeUndies is so confident in their product that if you don't like your first pair, it's on them. So if you want the most comfortable underwear ever and also support the channel to help us produce more content, good things come in big packages at MeUndies. You can use our link in the description below to get 20% off your first order plus free shipping at MeUndies.com/FSG. First off, we must immediately get this out of the way and establish it clearly and as a truth. Stealth Rock is an absurdly broken move. There are no two ways about it. Even if you think its overall impact is good, it is in and of itself incredibly overpowered, and there have been many heated debates about whether it should have the place it does in the game. The most immediate pro of heavy duty boots is, then, obvious. Anything that can quell the oppressive effect of Stealth Rock is going to be beneficial. Rocks alone can cause many games to quickly spiral out of control, too quickly at times, and with boots, this undesirable element almost completely ceases to exist. Rocks aren't the only hazard to give battlers a tough time either. Spikes have been maligned for many generations, at numerous points finding themselves considered among the most directly malignant causes of a generation's over-centralization or lack of balance. Furthermore, in a world of Toxapex, it's nice to have recourse against toxic spikes that doesn't involve absorbing them with their own Toxapex, and even being guarded against sticky web can be massively helpful in staving off volatile cheese matchup. It even makes one wonder, would boots be a positive addition to generations prior, many of which had metagame stages almost entirely characterized by overwhelming hazard stacking? It's a particularly salient proposal regarding Gens 5 and 6 OU, which were well known for being overrun by spikes largely thanks to their generally flawed anti-hazard methods. We can see some semblance of this concept playing out in Generation 9. Hazards are easier to use than ever, with the enormous distribution of spikes, as well as the addition of the amazing Ceaseless Edge, Hisui, and Samurott. Additionally, getting rid of them with the fog is incredibly challenging thanks to the incredible Goldango's good as gold ability that blocks the hazard clearing effect, and for good measure, Goldango also blocks rapid spin too. It's not the best switch into the excellent spinner Great Tusk, but it has its methods, mostly air balloon, or just the option to pivot, much like how in a previous generation, Gengar might have pivoted into Starmie Spin before pivoting out to a more threatening Pokemon, hazards having been preserved. the overall point, getting rid of hazards is incredibly difficult in Generation 9, and yet as good as they are, they do not have the tier in a stranglehold thanks to Boots. Even Great Tusk finds itself running Boots quite often. This is a Pokemon that resists Stealth Rock, hardly the first choice you'd think of for the item, yet it's just that important to be immune to spikes and toxic spikes as well for that matter. The aforementioned Gens 5 and 6 as well as 4 and 7 also saw arguably overpowered pairings of Hazard Spam with Magic Guard Pokemon, where the Magic Guarders would easily outlast opposing Hazard affected Pokemon. With Boots in tow, far more Pokemon would have been able to gain a kind of pseudo Magic Guard themselves, and thus become far more capable of going the distance against Clefable and friends. The Magic Guarders wouldn't be nearly as able of sitting back and letting the opponents wear themselves out, as was also a powerful strategy in Generations 4 and 7. This dynamic enabled by Boots promotes more active, direct, skill-intensive play, and we can absolutely see this as a positive, as it increases the interaction between players, demanding that they execute at a higher level over a higher number of turns. Indeed, this is the way that Boots provide not just balance, but a core part of Generation 8 OU's identity and the skills it demands of its player. The metagame is well known for its prolonged bouts between two teams, gradually struggling to make progress against each other, even when wielding multiple hard-hitting Pokemon. This disparity in pace relative to previous generations demonstrates clearly just how reliant we have been on hazards in the past. Some players dislike the slower pace, which is a major reason why Gen 8 OU is not as popular among the general player base, or not even the player base, but those who primarily spectate the tournament scene. But it is undeniably skillful, because the slower pace arises from a dynamic demanding much more from the players, and this slower pace is not for lack of heavy hitters either. There are plenty of monstrous threats in the tier. It simply becomes far more manageable to check them when one is only dealing with these threats and not these threats on top of hazard pressure. This brings us to another aspect of Gen 8. One doesn't have to go the slow balance route. There are plenty of powerful, successful team compositions that operate at a very fast pace. However, these aren't as easy to execute because, once again, given the popularity of Boots, you will have to overwhelm defensive Pokemon and cores from 100%. To witness the opposite, look at previous generations. Let's say 4 for this example. Players will regularly sacrifice their leads, often Azelf, just to have gotten Stealth Rock and momentum, because the power of rocks is that right off the bat, it enables this early momentum to be converted into massive progress. Simply dealing even what seems the minimal amounts of damage, all things considered, is sufficient to turn something like Dragon Dance Gyarados into a monster that destroys what seems close to the entire metagame. All it takes is a bit of chip on Zapdos, Latias, Rotom A, Pokemon you can never accuse of being especially Stealth Rock prone, and they're in immediate danger. Even a reliable check like offensive Suicune suffers. What exacerbates this is the advantage the Gyarados side has, because if all has gone well, and it often does, with this consistency being why the strategy is so widely used, the Azelf lead has not just gotten rocks, but prevented the opponents. The Gyarados team having rocks while not dealing with the opponents, and remember, this is happening all in the span of a few turns, can massively swing a battle. This isn't just for Gen 4 either. Identical dynamics are regular occurrences in hyper offense matchups in the following 3 generations as well. One can then see how Boots balances this out. It becomes much easier to deal with all manner of threats when rocks aren't digging into your check. You don't have to worry about playing the Stealth Rock versus no Stealth Rock game. The single turn effect of getting rocks, no matter how skillfully it is possible for this strategy to be executed, is no longer going to utterly ruin you, and from so early in the game too. You don't have to worry about the fact that you haven't been able to get rocks to deal with the opposing threat, since that threat is probably running Boots anyway, and since your check probably runs Boots, you don't have to worry about any disparity between them. In a way, Boots are the great equalizer, and it places emphasis on skill when you have the freedom to so directly answer your opponent. They will have to maneuver themselves in a position to bypass your defenses, as will you when attempting to execute their own offense. This concept is not dissimilar to the way RBY plays, which even among its detractors is praised for how it forces players to position themselves in order to succeed, not being plagued by hazards, but also not having passive recovery or leftovers of any kind, and having to break through opponents who have similar sturdiness. As such, it places battlers on very close to equal ground. Hazards are so widely ignored with boot spam that several teams, hyper offense very much included, cease to run Stealth Rock at all. It can often be a wasted move slot if you're never going to click the move, or if the turn you take to use it winds up amounting to very little, which it will if the opponent is packing a plethora of boots users. Instead, they commit even more fully to blasting through opponents without the aid of hazards. By eschewing hazards in this manner, they can even turn boots into wasted item slots that in no way contribute to their opponent's ability to withstand offensive onslaughts. Of course, if this practice were to become too widespread, Pokemon could just use other items without risk, and Stealth Rock is still a great move, but occasionally going sans rocks is an effective strategy, and it is one that requires skill to identify and utilize. Additionally, though we have been proselytizing about how great boots are, they are also not riskless. It's not just the fact that they prevent you from using other items you might want, though this is admittedly not too much of a factor given how boots are so incredible that they tend to outweigh the benefits of others. There's not much better than bypassing such brutally powerful elements of the game. No, it's more the fact that if you are over reliant on boots to function, you are utterly terrified of one of the best, most popular moves in the game, Knockoff. Knockoff had been widely spammed as an offensive tool since its buffs in Gen 6, far before boots came into the picture, but they take on incredible new value in boots heavy metagames. It's somewhat akin to the shift in the view of hazards when Defog was buffed in Gen 6. At first, people thought, oh, Defog means I'm good against hazards, and then hazard abusing players punished them for this assumption, given how easy it was to play around and or abuse the Defoggers. Put simply, if you are complacent in your over-reliance on boots doing all your anti-hazard work for you, a good player will make you rue your choices with a well-placed knockoff. Suddenly your boots are gone and hazards are going to rip you apart just as they would have in previous generations. This is another skill intensive aspect of boots. You have to be careful to preserve the boots in the face of a move flying around every corner, and this is especially challenging given the situations that can be forced by some of the premier knockoff users in the tier. For example, Zapdos is an excellent Kartana answer, but once it loses its boots to Kart's knockoff, it's terrified of Stealth Rock, and there will need to be some defogging if the Zap user doesn't want Kartana running circles around them with the easiest rocks assisted double switches ever. Even a lucky static paralysis won't help against the Kartana teams that pair it with cleric support from something like Dragonite, specifically to enable such a dynamic, though this is specific to controversial can of worms that is static and flame bodies placed in Gen 8. Anyway, the heads up play required for preserving one's boots is not an unreasonable demand either, not by a long shot. It's incredibly similar to how, say, Gen 7 Celesteela, another Kartana answer incidentally, but one that likes pairing with another card check specifically for the knockoff eventuality. It's similar to how Steela must be very careful to maintain its leftovers lest it lose a great deal of effectiveness. Now the cons. Here's the most immediate. You know how for generations there have been many Pokemon that are incredibly difficult to deal with but are held back by Stealth Rock? You know where this is going. In the exact same way, one can see the boots wearing Stealth Rock weak threat coming but can do very little to stop it. The poster Pokemon for this is of course Volcarona, recently banned from Generation 9 for a second time. Even with rocks in the picture, Volcarona is contentious, having received a great deal of scrutiny in Generations 5 and 6 as well as not being far behind in Gen 7. It's an incredible example of the concept previously illustrated in the Gen 4 Dragon Dance Gyarados section, but when Volcarona can ignore rocks entirely, it ascends to new levels of terror. Volcarona is far from the only such Pokemon either. Generation 8 also saw Cinderace, a Pokemon that no one would have dared deem broken with rocks in the picture, banned twice for the havoc it wreaked with boots, and there were many outspoken against the effect Weavile had on the tier as well. Boots were so good, the famously frail Weavile actually became quite consistently capable of taking the hit or two it needed in order to destroy the opponent, hits it never would have dreamed of previously. It's not just about creating monsters that are broken in and of themselves either. Boots enable another arguably broken, or at least not the most competitively minded aspect of the game, one largely kept in check by hazards: switch moves. Volt turn chains have been irritating all the way back in Gen 5. Heck, U-turn spam alone can be pretty obnoxious in Gen 4. In Gen 8, it wasn't just Volt turn anymore either. Okay, flip turn wasn't exactly the most common, but you know what was? A buffed teleport, which had negative priority, meaning that you'd take the hit and then get your teammate in without taking any damage. This was especially important given that the move was primarily used by Slowbro and Slowking, two Pokemon incredibly good at taking hits and using their regenerator ability to heal off the damage without even taking a turn for it. In fact, teleport was basically a 33% recovery move for them, which is terrifying to think about. about, let alone face. The fact that this could not be mitigated by hazards made the strategy so good as to basically be riskless in almost every case, especially since the Pokemon being teleported in was also probably running boots, and that is the point in summation. Boots are already so good as to be an option devoid of most risk. They're safe and not less effective or easily punishable for being so. A description also applicable to Swish moves, and when you paired the two, you had options that you could see coming from a mile away, yet could do almost nothing to stop. So few and insufficient were the options to combat them. It was incredibly common to see teams pile on the boots holding Swish move users and chain the moves together in succession again and again and again and again. It was referred to by the player base as the Vortex. It was an inescapable barrage of Switch moves, especially because the Switch move users were among the best Pokemon in the game. Even with the broken Cinderace and Magearna axed, one still regularly had to contend with Dragapult, Landorus Therian, Tornadus Therian, Rillaboom, Tapu Koko, Rotom Wash, the Slow Twins, and many others. That was just the Crown Tundra metagame too. Previously, Wish Teleport Clefable had slowed the tier down to a snail's pace with its constant, unstoppable healing of its teammates back to full. Of course, Swish moves would have been highly effective even without boots, but the fact that one couldn't slow the assault with hazards left players with very little recourse but to simply try to weather the storm. Finally, it boils down to a concept touched on at the end of the pro section. The fact that by virtue of boots' effect being so much better than pretty much anything else that might compete for their slot, the opportunity cost for using them is nearly nil. It is arguable that, while hazards may often be overbearing, they are generally healthy for keeping broken monsters in check. Not just Volcarona-esque extremes, but everything. Everything that isn't Magic Guard anyway. And what do you know? Magic Guard users are also controversial for how they ignore hazards and become massively difficult to deal with as a result. So with both pros and cons in mind, how do they come together in reality? Well, you remember how we previously mentioned boots being spammed on many Pokemon across teams. That's not really the case, in Gen 8 anyway. In Gen 9, they will be necessary so long as the so-called greater evil of being overwhelmed by hazards remains such a threat. In Gen 8 though, turns out there isn't such effortless lack of opportunity cost, given how many of the best Pokemon want to run other items. Melmetal, Heatran, Landorus T, and Garchomp love their leftovers. Tapu Lele loves its Choice Specs and Scarf, as well as Twisted Spoon. Kartana and Urshifu Rapid Strike are running Choice Band and Protective Pads, while Kartana is also a superb Scarfer. And while Dragapult can run boots, it also is a fierce wielder of Choice Specs. Even the famous boots user Weavile sometimes opts for Choice Band as well. Thus, it's not just boots the metagame. Even the bulkiest, slower paced balance teams that are the seeming culprit behind longer games usually don't use more than one or two boots Pokemon. The reason for such teams are so powerful is not because of Boots' infallibility, but because of the reliability of Clefable, the Slow Twins Future Sight, and the aforementioned powerful threats like Melmetal and Heatran. Thus, the metagame naturally skews towards bulk, but not necessarily towards boots. Incidentally, at the time of this video, there is an ongoing Gen 8 OU tournament with boots banned and Cinderace unbanned, but without boots, it doesn't get much use, not even to use the amazing move Court Change. More importantly, the metagame isn't much different, except it becomes more difficult to check the lights of Kartana without boots on Zapdos and Tornadus Therian, while Urshifu Rapid Strike is similarly more able to overwhelm a bootsless Slowbro. Turns out, boots actually decreases volatility. We can only imagine a bootsless metagame in Generation 9, but surely we can surmise that being forced into such a hazard-heavy metagame would be far more oppressive, and maybe we'd see a ban on spikes or something. In conclusion, while boots can be jarring and frustrating to deal with, we can see them overall as a sort of necessity in order to balance out a far greater error of Game Freaks, the power of hazards, and the difficulty that exists in slowing them down through traditional methods. Furthermore, we can actually see that the more controlled pace enabled by boots allows for greater emphasis on skill and long-term thinking, which is absolutely a positive. They are such a paradigm shift from the way the game has been played for so long that they require a significant adjustment, but overall, we can see them as a force for good. The way they enable certain Pokemon's brokenness can be irritating, but seeing as Pokemon are broken with the help of hazards, it's probably roughly the same effect all in all. If anything, maybe a boots clause limiting teams to one user, but even this seems unnecessary. Overall, heavy-duty boots are good for the game. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about this discussion? Are you pro boots? Are you anti boots? Whatever it is, let us know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And thank you so much to our platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.